So, but it was the concept of the internal family systems that helped me see myself in a different way, life as well as other people. And it also what keeps helping me as evolving and moving through dissolving my own conditioning, facing my traumas, and really return to who I really am at a core level. And I know I was led to this modality of IFS, not by mistake. And I was then guided to become a trained practitioner after realizing how this type of approach on a life skill basis, on a life skill level, is a missing link for many people that are trying to heal. And it's the first modality that made sense in the situation I was in for myself. As shadow work, as making the unconscious conscious in a very effective way so it can lead you forward on a daily basis as you're working with things. So without further ado, let's get this started. Let's get going. And yeah, let's move into this. Now, my work or the internal family systems modality, maybe for you, if you resonate with the things that you're seeing here on the screen. Now, if you're the kind of person where you're finding yourself often feeling like consumed or overwhelmed by your emotions on a regular basis, maybe you struggle with negative self-talk, you're constantly worrying or stressed, or just this general overwhelm that daily life can bring us. Maybe you're somebody that is very hypervigilant, or you're struggling with rumination, and you find yourself stuck in those repetitive patterns, right? And experiences where you just feel like, why does life keep bringing me the same thing over again? Like, where's my lesson? And that's where shadow work is all about, right? So, and also if you find yourself often overly affected or triggered by other people's actions and reactions, and you just can't shake it, or you have a difficult time shake it, IFS can definitely be for you, because it's really a way of helping you process those things, and understand better what's going on for yourself, and also on the level of other people sometimes. So if you're looking for like increased self-awareness and self-compassion, reduced emotional overwhelm, more nervous system regulation, if you want to improve your relationships and your interpersonal skills, and if you want more increased connection and taking action from your authentic self, if you want to start healing your inner child, your traumas, IFS, the skills of IFS, especially as a life skill approach, may definitely be for you. Like, what is IFS? The internal family systems therapy is an evidence-based approach to psychotherapy, bridging spirituality with psychotherapy. And that is really what resonated so much with me. Because again, we are spiritual beings in a human body. We are both. We need to consider our energetic aspect, and we also have to work with our brain and our body. So it's really a mind, body, soul approach. IFS is a transformative tool that conceives of every human being as a system of protective and wounded inner parts, led by a core self, which you would consider your true self, your higher self, your soul, etc. And together, these parts and the higher self, which we're going to talk about, they make up your internal family system. And again, more to that in a second. So this has nothing to do with your external family per se. This is about self-discovery. This is about self-realization. And while IFS is not inherently a somatic practice, it contains aspects of somatic work and how our emotions and our body interact with each other, which is an important skill, right, to learn. Additionally, incorporates what you would call shadow work, inner child work, and concepts of shamanic practices compared to soul retrieval, as well as working with the 5 elements. And it can also contain other spiritual aspects, as well as addressing generational and ancestral trauma. So it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself spiritual or religious. This is really about how does it resonate with you, right? If you believe in some sort of energetic makeup of us, our soul, this can definitely resonate with you. So what is the goal? What is the goal of IFS coaching? The goal is to liberate our parts that we're going to talk about from their extreme roles so they can shift into their authentic way of functioning, helping to regain trust in our higher self, in our self leadership, and to achieve balance and harmony and wholeness of our whole entire system and soul makeup so we can engage with our inner and outer world from a heart-centered place. So again, IFS conceives of every human being as a system of protective and wounded inner parts led by a core self, true self, higher self, your soul, your energetic makeup, etc. And together they make up your internal family system. IFS believes that the mind is naturally formed in different sub-personalities in a good way. More to that a little bit later. Viewing the intrapsychic process of a dynamic system and recognizing the core essence of self. And IFS helps people access and heal their protective parts, or what you can consider the destructive and repetitive patterns and traits, and heal their wounded inner parts by first helping to reconnect to the authentic self, which is super, super important. And then from that place, come to understand and heal these parts. And oftentimes, when we think of our shadows or these repetitive patterns and behaviors that we're having, that is our conditioning, right? It's like that is how we grew up. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you can also think of it like it's about healing our shadows, healing our conditioning, and coming back to ourselves, who we really are at our core. So we're going to go explore these different forms of parts together. And we're going to start with the self, and then we'll do a wonderful 20-minute meditation. So get comfy for that later, before we then go into the other parts. So to understand the self, we are all born with a core self, a higher self, a true essence, an open heart space. And from this place, that's where we feel what would be considered the 8 C's: calmness, compassion, curiosity, confidence, courage, creativity, clarity, and connectedness. And of course, there's other traits such as love and kindness. They're also parts of ourself. Our higher self is this joyful, all-knowing part that is excited about life and about the experience on earth. And together with ourselves, we are born with different parts and traits that make up our own personality, right? That's our soul essence. We're having all these different parts that make up our individual personality. So how we individually express ourselves. And when we are first born with these parts and qualities, generally they all function harmoniously with the guidance of our higher self. And they're expressing themselves authentically. But this may change as we grow up very quickly because of our conditioning. Now, before we're going to talk about other parts, I want to start simply with a meditation. It's a beautiful 20-minute grounding meditation. It's a version of a meditation that was developed by the founder of IFS, where in this meditation, you're going to get a chance to kind of feel the sensation of what self may feel like for you. I think, some of us are very heart-centered and grounded already. We know exactly what self feels like to us. Like, what does that core heart center, this true authentic self actually feel like? And for others, it's they don't even really know, or they're not quite sure because they're they have a really hard time accessing that space. So I think it's very important that we know for ourselves what it can feel like. Now, I want to mention that IFS doesn't work that way. IFS is not based on meditation. This is really just me giving you a chance to experience some calmness and just settling in. This is also a meditation that is part of my newsletter. But it's usually, we can experience self when we really can access meditation. Now, it might, or like a meditative space, basically. We can't live in only self in that sense. It is really a spaciousness that we can experience, but it's important that we know what it feels like for us, so we know whether or not we're acting from self when we are interacting with the world, or if we're interacting from parts, which is, those are also things that my coaching programs include is really helping you learn to always go back to self as you're interacting with the world, as you're making decisions, and working with your parts from that place. That being in self and acting through self in the world is one of the most important things, I think, to really live our authentic life. And it's so easy to get distracted by the world and just having parts take over. Anyways, so just to give you a quick idea, like for me, for example, self feels like a very calm space. There is no chatter in my head. It's very quiet. It's very centered. It's very still. I have no tension in my body. My nervous system feels absolutely calm. It's clear. My mind is clear. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what I'm here for. It's a place that everything makes sense. Everything makes sense. And incorporating that into our daily life is super important. And I think a lot of us, again, have a really hard time accessing that space. So keeping that in mind, we can't really act from our heart center if we don't know what it truly feels like. So let's start with the wounded parts. Again, when we are first born, these parts and qualities that we have, that we come with, generally function harmoniously with the guidance of our self. And they are expressing themselves authentically, right? When you think of a small child, they just express themselves authentically, and that's what we do. And as we grow up, in fact, very quickly, even as small children, and living in a society where we're influenced by different outside sources, such as family dynamics, societal structures, passed down genetics, traumas, epigenetics, all these things, we are very quickly influenced. And if our childhood basic needs for connection and protection aren't met, and we don't have caregivers that can help us process our painful experiences, we are then left with wounded parts that hold painful emotions. Something that happens to many, many of us, right? Because we rely on our caregivers to meet our needs when we are children. And we learn to push these feelings away in an attempt to connect and fit in and meet our basic survival needs. Because oftentimes the children, because our caregivers may be overwhelmed themselves, they're dealing with their own things, we learn that our authentic expression is not safe. So, and when that happens, and we learn to push our feelings away, we push our self away, our higher self. We push our soul, our self, out of the way, because our internal system has determined that authentic expression isn't safe. And as an adult, we may experience these emotions that we have coped with in ways as they're listed on the slide. So we may, go into behaviors such as codependency. We consistently experience loneliness throughout our life, even if we're surrounded by people. We feel this inherent lack of safety, shame, grief, worthlessness, terror, fear, neediness, and a lot of these things we push away as much as we can. But that's exactly why we are then stuck in those repetitive patterns, in the same type of relationships, in the same type of work, jobs, just things keep coming up over and over again because we push these things away. Often our wounded parts are childhood wounds, but not all of them. It's not exclusive, but oftentimes they are. So because of the experiences as children, we then create protective mechanisms, right, to cope with our surroundings. The creative coping mechanisms that we develop as children to ensure safety in the world are called protectors by IFS. Their job is to make sure that we aren't rejected or that the intense emotions of our childhood wounds aren't overwhelming us. Because even as adults, they would leave us incapable of functioning properly in the world, or leave us, again, having the fear that we're not accepted if we would have these intense emotions come out. And that is what creates self-abandonment. Those strategies in the long run really leave us never getting our needs truly met because they're reactionary and they are suppressing our real desires and authenticity in disguise for connection. Like, that is self-abandonment. I do want to mention that many protective strategies in part form are also younger than our current age, depending what age they were developed. And from their perspective, they are seeing us still as an incapable child, which is who they are protecting. They're not protecting us as an adult. They are trapped in the past, just like our childhood wounds. So our shadows are trapped in the past, right? And that's why a lot of those are familiar with shadow works, those patterns that we have created are really past experience that are just replaying themselves. So what happens to us on a day-to-day basis is the concept of blending, and is related to how we operate in our parts. It means that during the time where we are blended, we don't have access to our heart space or our higher self if our parts react from a protective or wounded space. Now, blending isn't always unhealthy. If we blend with our natural part, that is, for example, good at organizing, and we stay connected to our heart center, our part is basically governed by self. And that's totally fine. That's how we normally function. We always function in some sort of part. Again, our part, as we come with into the world, our parts, authentically, that's our individual soul makeup. So we all have different gifts that we come with and different strengths that we come with. And as long as they function harmoniously, everything's great. But oftentimes in this case of blending, when it comes to our wounding, we often blend with our protective parts. So as an example, somebody may ask you a very general question about a topic, and for some reason, your reaction is proportionally irrational. And you may react in a snippish way or in a dismissive way. Or maybe you just have an underlying feeling of this is triggering you. And that means the reaction, so let's say the snippy response you gave, is you acting from a protective part. But you're blended with that part. You don't notice your overreaction in that moment. When we blend with our traumatized parts, it can be very obvious. There might be hysterical crying, there may be panic attacks, extreme despair. Generally, there's some emotional overwhelm. But many people unknowingly and unconsciously live blended in their protective parts for a large portion of their life because it's literally what brought them through life since they were children. And that is what is often called conditioning. Our conditioned self, or you can refer again to it as your shadows. Some of them you may be aware of and others you're not. So you may say, well, that's just me. I'm hot-headed, but maybe it's just a protective version of you. Blending often pops up in daily situation when you look at them from an adult perspective or like from a grounded, self-centered perspective. They make no sense. Again, like, why did your body freeze all of a sudden, or you got defensive because someone acted a little bit grumpy towards you, when in reality it had nothing to do with you? But for your protective parts, because it reminds them of a past traumatizing experience, that's why you react like that. And at times we have no control over. That's part of the work, is learning to recognize when we are in those parts, when we are blended, so we can change our reactions. And again, those are the things that I incorporate in my coaching programs, is really learning, when are we in self? When are we in our protective parts? How do we unblend and go back into self so that we can actually react from our heart space, or we can change how we live our life? We can change how we see the world. How can we actively do that on a daily basis? And how can we learn it as a skill? Because it is a skill that has to be developed. But again, these parts that blend with you, they're here to protect you. And they often don't even give you a chance to react from a mature, centered way to the situation. And instead they just project onto the other person. And maybe the other person's grumpiness came from their protective part. And these coping strategies or shadows prevent us from living a fulfilling life, keeping us stuck in a negative, destructive patterns of all sorts, just to protect us from feeling our traumas. And again, a part of IFS skills, which I think one is of the most important skills, is to consciously learn to recognize when we are overtaken by our parts, being able to unblend and to consciously access our authentic self, so that we're then able to not only act, but also receive from that place. But before we can do that, we have to be able to recognize our parts for what they are and start learning about them and creating a relationship from our authentic self, from a place of compassion for them and their role that they have been playing for you. Once we have more of an understanding and awareness, we can then learn to consciously unblend, reconnect to self, and then actively change the patterns to create new safe experiences. And that's the work. But it actually starts by accessing the parts, and also understand that none of your parts, none of your shadows, and none of your what you can call ego is bad. None of it is bad. It all has been bringing you to where you are today and it's been protecting you. We have to learn to accept and love, or accept all of us. And this is the work that we need to do with ourselves to really shape that future in our life. So feel free to take a screenshot of this slide if you'd like as a reference. This is about really daily life skills with IFS. What's the goal? What are we doing? Like steps to return to yourself. Pause this recording if you need to as well. But discovering our parts and that we actually have parts is really the first step, followed by additional steps and skills in relating towards our parts and move towards balance and regulation and healing. A lot of healing is done by exploring and connecting to our parts. From their perspective, we and our authentic self may not have been present for a really long time. So they don't trust. And we have to reestablish this relationship and show them that we are really here to listen. This is also what creates self-compassion. This is what creates self-acceptance. This is what creates integration of all our different parts. And we need to be able to connect to self. So one of my goals is to teach you all these steps connecting to self and all these further skills in a digestible way, so you can literally start integrating it into daily life and just make it part of your self-healing journey, so you can learn to process things and heal things as they happen in regular life. One saying in IFS is to basically encourage people to become a self-led therapist to themselves. So teaching you processing skills that heal your parts. And with extended IFS skills for daily life from a life skills perspective, and the more you're actually able to consciously go into self and tend to your own parts, the more you can start healing yourself and bring more ease and calmness to your whole system and your nervous system and your mind. You will slowly be able to start reparenting yourself and start meeting your own needs that we often have been seeking to be met from the outside world. Through your own skills and your own awareness, you'll be able to start relating to the world in a different way, instead of just getting stuck in trapped patterns, emotions, causing the same negative experiences over and over again. You'll also be able to improve your relationships and communication skills, because you'll also learn that other people react from their parts too. Being able to integrate these skills into daily life will really open up the doors for true deep healing, as you will be able to learn to tend to your own parts and start soothing and healing yourself. You will better know how to process your feelings and emotions when activated, which will help causing symptoms and triggers to be less intense over time. There are some very specific actions and steps that you can develop